Thanksgiving weekend, 1984, 6-year-old Ethan Miller disappeared within a casino arcade in Primm, Nevada. One second, he was there, drenched in neon light, intensely playing his video game. The next, he was not. Nobody noticed he had disappeared. Nobody heard anything. And when detectives arrived on the scene, nothing added up. No fight, no motive, no clue, just a child who had simply vanished. Weeks became days. The vast, uncaring desert provided no clues. How does a boy disappear in an area full of people, cameras, and always light? It started as the Miller family was driving home from their Thanksgiving vacation to Las Vegas. The Nevada sky was a brilliant, blank expanse above, pale and motionless. Dry desert wind softly whistled through the open, cracked windows of the vehicle. Riding in the front passenger seat was Roxanne Miller, 29 Miller, 29 doors of the vehicle. Riding in the front passenger seat was Roxanne Miller, 29, riding with her father driving, who was behind the wheel. Riding in the back seat, snuggled up against the seat, was 6-year-old Ethan, gripping his small plush puppy. The weekend had been a great one. They'd overindulged on the turkey, giggled with relatives, and taken Ethan to experience the glittering lights of the Las Vegas Strip for the very first time. By late afternoon, the car was quiet, that heavy post-holiday exhaustion setting in. Roxanne's father at last suggested, "Let's stop at Whiskey Pete's. I could use a cup of coffee before we tackle the long haul home." Now, Whiskey Pete's Casino wasn't much of a resort. It was more of a truck stop, some squat, boxy structures shining with neon just off the road, a stop where travelers gassed up, had a burger, or made one final try at Lady Luck before heading into California. Harmless enough from the outside, a flash of calf, a flash of calf, a flash of calf. They arrived just past 5 p.m. The sun was setting behind the hills, casting hues of rose and copper across the sky. Within, the air vibrated with slot machines and conversation. It was then that Ethan saw it, a tiny arcade, hidden beside the door, glowing lights, happy music, the thud of coin-fed games. His face glowed with excitement. "Can I play, Mom?" Roxanne smiled. "Just for a few minutes." She knelt down, zipped up his red-jacketed chair, it's the wrench. She knelt down, zipped up his red-jacketed G. "It is from what? It's slept with the red jacket you cheaply. Grandpa and I are just getting some change and coffee. We'll be back in a bit." Ethan nodded eagerly. He was a reserved child, timid around strangers, but captivated by noise and light. Roxanne had left him alone once in public before, such as at grocery stores or gas stations. He'd always obeyed, always remained where she left him. The arcade opened directly into the main corridor. She saw him in the distance as she moved away, still small, intent, and says she moved away, still small, intent. She and her dad moved in the direction of the cashier station, perhaps 50 or 60 feet away. Her dad teased that Nevada coffee was like battery acid, and Roxanne rolled her eyes, laughing. For a couple of minutes, it was all completely normal. They waited in line for coins, took 2 coffees, and discussed the drive home. Roxanne glanced at her watch. It was 5:20 p.m. When they arrived back, Ethan's game screen was still flickering, obscured. She first thought he ducked behind a machine, but when she'd called him a few seconds later and heard nothing, her smile dropped. She made a circle around the arcade, nothing. A couple of kids continued playing, unaware. None of them had seen him exit. She checked the hallway, calling again, a bit louder this time. Still nothing. The diner, bathrooms, gift shop, empty. "Dad, he's not here," she said, her voice trembling now. Her father frowned. They started a careful search. checking the phone alcove, the restrooms, the exits. Roxanne asked the cashier if a boy in a red jacket had passed by. The woman shook her head. "Maybe he's with your husband?" "I'm not married," Roxanne replied quietly. 5 minutes had gone by. Then 10. The light outside started to dim into dusk. The crowd within the casino grew denser as travelers paused to eat supper or play a final round of games. Roxanne's voice pierced, becoming more urgent as she cried out for her son. She walked into the parking lot, eyeing row after row of cars radiating under the yellow lights. For an instant, she almost expected to see Ethan standing by their old Chevrolet, stuffed dog in hand. But the lot was deserted, only the wind kicking up dust across the pavement and the constant hum of traffic rolling down the highway. Back indoors, her father spoke to one boat. Our father spoke to one. His tone was composed, but urgent. "My grandson's missing," he stated. The security guard did just what he had been instructed to do. He picked up his radio, clearly described Ethan, and told the control room to monitor all exits. "Hey, he's just hiding somewhere," the guard replied, attempting to be calm and reassuring. "Kids do that all the time." Roxanne wished it to be so, wished desperately that this was a game of hide and seek. The following 20 minutes were a blur. She patrolled every inch of the ground floor by the flashing slots, the lengthy buffet line, the gift shop, the front desk. She even looked into the stairwell to the parking garage. Nothing. No sign of Ethan. As she returned to the arcade, the guard was on his radio once more, now with a more serious expression. "We're going to make an announcement," he said to her. At 6:07 p.m., the casino's public address system sprang to life with a burst of static. "Attention guests, we are helping to find a missing child. 6-year-old male, brown hair, blue glasses, red jacket, blue jeans. If you've seen this child, please contact security at the front desk." The words echoed again, ringing above the din of machinery and chatter. A handful of guests lingered for a moment, glanced about half-interested. To everyone else, it was white noise, but to Roxanne, it was the whole world. She froze, pulse racing, desperate to catch any faint sound of a voice responding. All she heard was the relentless ringing and clanging of the casino floor. 2 additional guards appeared 10 minutes later. They requested all the details she could think of, what Ethan was dressed in, what he had been playing, even his height. They jotted down notes, nodded, and dispersed to inspect, to hand, to trust, or to a little also. You're both in click across which area play gas. And the dissolves is still on call. Roxanne trailed behind them. She couldn't remain still. Her father hovered at the front entrance, eyeing every individual passing by. Some of the guests reported that they could have seen a little boy around the arcade area earlier, perhaps with an adult. A woman recalled him walking with a man, but hadn't given it a thought. "I just assumed it was his dad," she whispered. The man was described as indistinct at best, a white male likely to be in his 30s, blonde hair, glasses, medium build. Another guest believed he had seen the same man and boy walking towards the south exit perhaps a half hour earlier, but could not be positive. At 6:45 p.m., casino security contacted the Clark County Sheriff's Department in Las Vegas. An immediate patrol unit was dispatched. By the time officers got there, shortly after 7, all side doors had been shut down. Roxanne was waiting outside the arcade, holding Ethan's little backpack in both her shaking hands. One officer started taking her statement as she talked between tears. "I was only gone a few minutes," she repeated. "He wouldn't live without me. He just wouldn't." The questions came quickly. Did she have any family problems? Any custody issues? Anyone who? Anyone who? Roxanne shook her head. "We're just passing through," she said quietly. Deputies started a full sweep of the casino. Every 15 minutes, the same message echoed over the PA system. Missing child, 6 years old, red jacket, blue glasses. Staff searched restrooms, storage closets, stairwells again and again. Outside, the desert air had grown chilly. Flashlights moved back and forth through the parking lot, beams slicing across fields of park Thompson system viewer. Police were kindly talking to the handful of children still around, hoping someone would remember something helpful. Most said no. One small boy spoke of a man wearing glasses who had spoken to him previously but could not adequately describe him. Another reported that he could possibly have spotted Ethan by the prize counter. None of it went anywhere. While all this was going on, Roxanne's dad went outside to phone his wife back in California. She, in turn, called the local TV stations. By 8:30 p.m., radio reports statewide in Nevada were already broadcasting the headline, "Missing Child at Nevada Casino." Within Whiskey Pete's, the mood started changing. Visitors appeared nervous, glancing towards the arcade section. Some grumbled in annoyance over the commotion, but most continued to gamble. The slot machines continued to beep. Dealers continued to call out bet, bet, continued to call out bet, bet, what's core, to call out bet, bets, bet, XT, and Surus. You in yours crack our open to gamble. The slot machines continued to beep. Dealers continued to. Life within the casino continued, while a mother walked its aisles white with desperation, looking at every face which went by. As the blue and red strobes finally ran across the front windows, a subdued crowd clustered near the door. Officers entered with notepads and radios, consulting with security for a moment before commandeering Roxanne. She sat down to make her official statement in a cramped, windowless room, her hands still holding on to that small backpack as if it were the last tangible thing remaining in her universe. The casino manager acted fast. He provided floor plans and gave access to the security office to the officers investigating, but the surveillance system was outdated, grainy black and white video on a continuous loop. The officers would spend hours going through it, and even then they could not be sure they'd find something helpful. In an instant, what had started as an ordinary roadside stop during a holiday drive became an official police case. A file was opened. A name handwritten neatly on the first page, Ethan Miller, age 6, case numbered 84ALN125. Outside, patrol cars sat parked under the neon signs of the casinos, red and blue lights reflecting off white stucco walls in slow, silent curves. Officers started moving out into the vast, open desert, their flashlights slicing through the night. The wind was cool, the night stretching out endlessly around them. Inside, the casino's public address still played through the loudspeakers. If you have seen this child, please contact security immediately. Close to 2 hours now since anyone had last laid eyes on Ethan Miller. No one yet knew that the search wouldn't end that evening, or that it would escalate into one of the most eerie cases Nevada would ever experience. For the time being, there was just silence and disorientation. A lost child, an anxious mother in waiting, and everything else around her, the incessant hum of a casino that never really sleeps. As night fell on Prim, the disappearance of Ethan was high on the agenda of every law enforcement agency in the surrounding area. Within minutes, other patrol units from the Clark County Sheriff's Department arrived on the scene. Deputies from adjacent jurisdictions soon followed. Volunteers started showing up too, local residents who had overheard the radio broadcasts and came in to assist. They scoured the service roads, the Interstate 15 dusty shoulders, and open country that lay in all directions from the casino. But the desert was governed by its own laws. The ground was level and open, scattered with small rises and clumps of arid brush. Sand was loose on the ground, and the wind, which picked up force in the evening, swept away any small prints before they could be tracked. Officers picked their way deliberately, flashlights held, scanning the quiet. Inside, detectives combed every hallway, service corridor, and back room. Outside, mounted patrol units combed the dunes on horseback, their silhouettes against the faraway glow of neon lights. Search dogs were deployed, their handlers clutching one of Ethan's shirts, something Roxanne had held tight in her hands since he vanished. Detectives also kept on questioning anyone who had been around the arcade that night. One man recalled seeing a blonde-haired man wearing glasses walk hand in hand with a young boy down one of the side hallways. He said the boy did not appear scared. He walked normally as if he knew the man. That piece of information made a young nation made Iran made of the is tapped. That piece of information made Enmeda, dude salad, or pure and redless. And even purely breath. That's been piece of information made in Whitmore with lip one Brooklyn. Another worker believed that she saw a boy wearing a red jacket in the area of the prize counter shortly after the disappearance, but she was unsure in her recollection. Through dozens of interviews, the accounts differed. Some described the man as tall, others as average. A few attested he had light brown hair, not blonde. Some saw glasses, some did not. Even minor details, such as with which hand he grasped the boy, altered with each interview. These discrepancies rendered it nearly impossible to develop a clean composite drawing. Nevertheless, all statements were recorded and compared, detectives looking for any overlap, any consistent thread that could lead them to something tangible. Then there was the video. The tapes from the surveillance provided little assistance. The low-resolution black-and-white video flickered and hazed with every frame. A small figure passed by the arcade games on one camera. Another caught what could have been an adult male, potentially the vague description, but the figure was too indistinct to ascertain for sure. There was no way to confirm whether the child in the footage was Ethan or whether the man was involved at all. And since the security system re-recorded itself every 30 minutes, much of the footage from those crucial early moments had likely been erased before investigators ever pressed play. No vehicles fitting the incomplete description had been spotted departing the casino that evening. Employees sifted through the hotel register and guest list, but nothing caught their eye. No unusual names, no inconsistencies. It was as if whoever abducted Ethan, if anyone did, had simply merged with the commotion and haze. With so many individuals passing through the building each hour, it was well within the realm of possibility that Ethan had disappeared in plain sight under the light of neon without anyone even noticing. Whatever man this may have been, if indeed there had been a man, was a ghost. As the day wore on, law enforcement expanded their search. Police forces throughout Nevada and nearby California were notified. A special bulletin was dispatched to the California Highway Patrol detailing Ethan with careful attention to detail, 6-year-old male, brown hair, blue glasses, red jacket, blue jeans. Police radioed truck stops, gas stations, and rest stops along the highway between Prim and Mountain View and requested each patrol unit to be on the lookout. Flyers with Ethan's picture were printed and given to local media, television, radio, and newspapers. The search extended beyond the casino and out into the open desert. Deputies walked in long lines, side by side, shouting Ethan's name into the wind. Mounted patrols patrolled the rough terrain where cars could not travel, each team meticulously marking its path to ensure no area was left uncovered. But the desert was cruel. Loose sand, dispersed brush, and little rolling dunes slowed things up. The casino's neon glow colored the nearby sky, but the light dissipated rapidly as they went further out. The wind stung eyes with dust, erasing footprints in minutes. Search dogs were deployed, noses to the ground. Roxanne had surrendered a small item of Ethan's clothing, something that still retained his scent. But even the dogs couldn't do it. The open air dispersed the trail, did double. The open air dispersed the trail. Dave the trail, doptis das am de bor boots, than tunally dresses. Within the casino, management remained fully cooperative. Investigators had full access to building blueprints, every passageway, exit, and entrance. Employees working during that night were questioned repeatedly about anything out of the ordinary that they may have witnessed. Detectives converged on the vicinity of the arcade and the intervening hallways. Security guards strained to remember anyone behaving suspiciously, someone lingering too long in one location, someone with a child, but nothing registered. The floor had been crowded, the din steady, movements crossed and blended together. It was precisely the sort of environment where something incomprehensible could occur unobserved. As night broke into dawn, the search grew again. Patrol vehicles were placed at highway exits close to Prim, including smaller service roads truckers and locals tended to take. Witnesses were interviewed again with more pointed questions this time. There were a few minor inconsistencies. One reported that the man was wearing a dark jacket over lighter attire. Another attested that he was wearing a sweater. Most concurred on the glasses, but a couple weren't sure. Height measurements varied anywhere from 5 foot 10 inch to 6 feet 2 inches. Nothing concrete, but detectives recorded it all. Even a tiny detail might make a difference down the line. By the end of that long, chilly night, Ethan was still gone. The dogs had scented a few weak trails, but nothing that took them anywhere, and perhaps the most unnerving aspect of all, there were no indications of struggle, no yelling, no disturbance, no calls of all zos. If Ethan had departed with someone, he seemed to have done so voluntarily, or at least without trepidation. That one detail kept detectives up all night. How did a 6-year-old leave a busy public area with a stranger and nobody notice? The news traveled throughout Nevada by morning. Local radio stations read Ethan's description every 30 minutes. Newspapers featured front-page headlines. Reporters called the sheriff's department to check for updates. The Clark County Sheriff's Office issued a brief, cautious statement. They verified the essential facts, the time, the place, the attire, and admitted the absence of firm leads. Next was a straightforward appeal. Public scrutiny generated a wave of passion and pressure on the investigation. In a matter of hours, phones at the casino as well as at the county sheriff's office were ringing, and odds ringing AA. Folks believed they had seen Ethan everywhere, from roadside gas stations to diners on the highway, but all but one or two of the leads proved to be mistaken identity or misinformation created by the rapidly spreading media coverage. By the close of that first hard 24 hours, police were in full swing. The inquiry was now official and meticulously organized. All the witness statements were typed, documented, and double-checked. Sketch artists worked far into the night, drawing composite drawings of the unknown man based on the most reliable eyewitness descriptions. The file was opened under a new title, Case 841128, Missing Minor Ethan Miller. It was officially labeled a suspected abduction with intent. That classification brought everything to a different level. It meant new procedures went into effect, multi-state coordination, and a search strategy that extended weeks if the case dragged on without resolution. Throughout, Roxanne remained on the premises. Fatigued and afraid, she sat for hours with detectives going over every recollection, Ethan's routines, the way he was around large groups of people, what he would have said or done if someone stopped people, what he would have said or done if someone stopped doing, if someone stopped. Her details were priceless, allowing police to whittle down the time and verify where he'd been seen most recently. The casino employees continued to cooperate as well. They swung open doors, typically off-limits to the public, handed over blueprints of buildings, and even assisted police in charting how visitors had navigated the arcade that evening. By morning, all the hallways, stairwells, and exits had been searched. Police had inspected every single car in the parking lot. The search had spilled out across hundreds of square meters inside the casino itself, the parking lots, and the desert's edge. Nevertheless, there was no evidence of Ethan. Detectives were left caught between two conflicting images. Witnesses had painted a serene child walking hand in hand with an adult, but the situation was legally an abduction. Without any struggle, no shouts for help, and no concrete evidence, every theory had gaps. The official report that evening mirrored just that doubt. It laid out Ethan's profile, the drawings, interpretations of the grainy surveillance tapes, and the agencies that were now on board. Each fact, no matter how minute, was retained, waiting for the day when something new would tie things together. Warning had brought no solutions. A 6-year-old boy had somehow vanished in one of the busiest, most well-lighted environments around beneath dozens of observed eyes. It just didn't add up. Officials observed the kind of disarray within which the setting had been one of flashing lights from the arcades, non-stop noise, hundreds of people coming and going. Within that disarray, even something monumental could go unnoticed. At the end of day one, there were no concrete tips, only inquiry, only were, it's just rest, the rented. How was a child just gone? Why hadn't anyone noticed the moment it did happen? The case, later assigned the number 841,129 in internal files, would soon be dubbed one of Nevada's most befuddling missing child enigmas. It wasn't the tragedy alone that made it stick in memory, it was the utter lack of evidence. The search revealed just how tenuous investigations were in the 1980s when surveillance wasn't widespread, GPS didn't exist, or electronic monitoring was non-existent. It all relied on memory, intuition, and chance. And then, approximately a month later, something came up. Maintenance staff sweeping a parking lot right next to Prim spotted something little beneath an older car. When they swept the dust and gravel off, they found a broken set of blue-framed glasses. They were twisted, scratched, and appeared like they'd been stepped on or mashed. There was nothing else in sight, no clothes, no toys, no other evidence. Investigators handled the find with the seriousness it warranted. They shot the spot, recorded all the details, and sketched the spot carefully on a map. The shattered blue glasses were put into an evidence bag, tagged D. For detectives, it was the first tangible lead since Ethan had disappeared from Whiskey Pete's casino. A thin, delicate strand in an otherwise bare trail. But as great as it was, the discovery was more questions than answers. No footprints, no fight, no other objects anywhere in sight. The glasses might have belonged to Ethan, or anyone else. They could have been lost days before, or even picked up by the desert breeze and carried there. Without background, the find was both important and infuriatingly ambiguous. Nevertheless, with so little else to work with, the glasses were treated like gold by the team. They were kept in controlled conditions, waiting for fingerprint and material analysis. The following day, police made a brief, guarded release. They verified the discovery and said that the glasses could be from the missing boy, although testing had yet to be completed. Officials first spoke publicly of a painful possibility that Ethan could be dead. The language was careful. They wanted to warn the public, but not to lose hope. There were no remains, no hint of foul play, just this one questionable clue. As she told detectives quietly but firmly, "If my son has died, show me where he lies. Until then, I'll believe he's out there somewhere." Her determination became a motivation for the investigation. She continued to cooperate with the police, sharing every detail she could about Ethan, his routine, phobias, and mannerisms toward strangers. Whatever could be used to visualize what he might do if he was on his own out there, frightened. In the meantime, the press clung to the story with zeal. Within a few hours of the police press conference, headlines crawled across Nevada and California. 6-year-old disappears from Nevada casino. Broken glasses remain. TV anchors repeated the same eerie question night after night. How could a child go missing in a busy, well-lit casino with only one broken object behind? The coverage resonated with the public. Calls came in from all over the region, people who said they had spotted a boy who matched Ethan's description. But again, as before, most of them went nowhere. Misidentifications, rumor, confusion, each call began hopefully and ended in frustration. The increasing media attention also made Roxanne's experience even more difficult. She was repeatedly forced to relive that night, responding to the same excruciating questions for journalists and detectives alike. Still, she never broke. Her determination, silent but intense, kept everyone in mind that no matter all the speculation, this was a mother searching for her child. For police, the case hung precariously in the balance. The public demanded answers. The department demanded truth. And what they had was a shattered pair of glasses and 1,000 unanswered questions. At each press conference, police made the same stark point. The glasses were significant, yes, but they proved nothing. Not life, not death, not where. Behind the scenes, investigators were confronting the harsh reality of 1980s-era limitations. Surveillance was grainy and inconsistent. There was no nationwide database for missing children. Forensic tools were database for missing children. Everything depended on patience, legwork, and human memory. With all that, Roxanne never gave up. She called upon advocacy groups, helped organize searches in the community, and kept posting flyers, her son's wide smile photos alongside the same 3 words that summarized her hope. Roxanne would not allow silence to prevail. Each call, each rumor, each distant possibility, she responded to them all. When volunteer groups in the area extended assistance, she met with them in person, always calm, always calm, always calm, always calm, always calm. She carried a tiny, faded notebook in her purse. Within names, telephone numbers, dates, small pieces of information that she wouldn't let herself forget. Each lead, no matter how doubtful, was recorded in that book. To her, it was not mere organization, it was action by faith. Even as the public sentiment grew dark, Roxanne's faith didn't falter. She didn't confront journalists or berate doubters. She just remained fixated. The finding of Ethan's glasses had turned into something much larger than an evidence, honest to goodness. It showed just how delicate preliminary investigations could be. One mediocre, unclear tip had run into nationwide obsession. To detectives, the glasses were a clue, one tiny piece in a puzzle with a lot of emptiness. To Roxanne, they were more evidence that her son had been there, evidence that something did occur. And perhaps that he was still out there somewhere. By the close of that initial month, the case had bifurcated. For the media and the public, the narrative had coalesced into one of tragedy, a lost child, an abandoned mother. But for Roxanne, the same revelation had served to reinforce her conviction that Ethan lived. That gap between public supposition and private optimism is typical in missing child investigations. When facts are lean, tales start to wander. Some glimpse a shut door, others a flash of one left slightly ajar. That underlying tension characterized the first month of the investigation. No new witnesses, no new physical evidence. The leads tailed off and the case stalled. But Roxanne did not. Her refusal to give up, to accept that her son was dead, became the building block for everything that followed. Her quest was about to go far beyond. Over the following months, she would cross state lines, reach out to advocacy groups, and keep Ethan's name in the public eye wherever possible. For the police, it was a plateau. For Roxanne, it was just the start. Detectives continued working meanwhile. They started scrutinizing anyone who had been present in Whiskey Pete's that day more thoroughly. One of the names that arose early on was that of Howard Lee Halp, a 38-year-old San Diego computer. Halp had worked at the casino on the day Ethan went missing. His timeline intersected with several of the eyewitness accounts, and his appearance was similar to some of the details in the composite sketches: average build, light-colored hair, glasses, late 30s. Even some of the patrons remembered seeing a man who looked roughly like that walking by the arcade with a child. It was sufficient for detectives to take a harder look. They questioned Halp as a subject of interest and searched his vehicle in depth, and then his San Diego residence. But nothing connected him to Ethan. No clothing, no photographs, no fingerprints. Though his presence at the casino was established, nothing directly implicated him in the disappearance of the boy. There was no concrete footage, no physical evidence, no witness who could positively identify him as the individual accompanying Ethan over accompanying Ethan of the accompanying Ethan of the accompanying Ethan is To his credit, Halp was fully cooperative. He answered questions freely, permitted police to search his property, and never expressed any signs of resistance. Ultimately, the detectives had no basis upon which to detain or charge him. Like many of the case's leads, his name became another what if on an already lengthy list of possibilities, but never a definite suspect. Detectives did not rest there. They submitted his clothes, car, and personal items for forensic analysis. Every inch was searched for fibers, fingerprints, or any point of contact with Ethan, but still nothing came up. And then there was the ultimate disappointment. Halp had an alibi. He stated that during the afternoon of Ethan's disappearance, he'd been on a recreational boat trip. That held up. A friend corroborated it, and so did the witnesses at the marina who recalled seeing him throughout the critical time frame. The police discovered Howard Halp's account surprisingly uniform. Each individual they spoke with, his boating partner, marina employees, even some passersby, provided the same overall timeline and explanation. Nothing went against his version of events. His alibi, although not watertight, was strong enough to give investigators pause. To take it a step further, investigators requested that Halp sit down for a polygraph exam. He didn't blink. In fact, he sat for 2 of them, ahead of schedule at that. Both times, the results were clean. No indicators of dishonesty when questioned about his whereabouts, what he'd been up to, or if he'd crossed paths with Ethan Miller that day. They can't be used as evidence in court, and experienced investigators know not to rely on them for a case, but they are a piece of the puzzle, and in Halp's situation, the image they created seemed believable. With his solid alibi and those smooth, steady test scores, suspicion began to fade. Perhaps, just perhaps, he wasn't guilty after all. But beyond the walls of the investigation, the tale was taking on a life of its own. The press had grabbed it. A missing young boy from a casino in Nevada, a stranger who fit the bill. It was the type of headline that held people. And once his name leaked, Howard Lee Halp became the story. Citizens demanded closure. And with no other suspects to turn to, officials made a decision that would seal Halp's fate. In early 1985, the police arrested Halp and charged him in relation to the disappearance of Ethan Miller. From the beginning, Halp maintained his innocence. For prosecutors, the case was a delicate balancing act. They had no concrete evidence, no fingerprints, no fibers, no tangible trace of Ethan anywhere with them. Trace of Ethan anywhere. No tangible trace of Ethan anywhere. Anywhere can no the gift in all press. Our orbs from press now. The case rested on witness memories and the mere fact that Halp had been there that day. During the 5-week trial, both sides laid everything bare. The prosecution leaned on the eyewitnesses who had seen a man with blonde hair and glasses near the arcade. They walked the jury through the casino timeline, emphasizing every small detail that could suggest opportunity. The defense responded with patience and accuracy. They presented the alibi, supported by several They reminded jurors that Halp had been fully cooperative and had taken not 1, but 2 polygraphs. They called in expert witnesses, psychologists who testified about how memory fails in chaotic environments like casinos, where lights flash and noise never ceases. In the meantime, outside the courtroom, the media spectacle never ceased. Cameras jammed the courthouse steps. Headlines portrayed Halp as either a villain or victim of circumstance. Daily testimony was grist for public opinion. In their closing remarks, the defense issued a muted but eloquent appeal. Don't let pressure determine this case. Let evidence, or lack thereof, be your guide. When the jury finally started deliberating, they combed through every word of testimony, every exhibit, every timeline chart. They measured the hesitancy of the witnesses against the cool consistency of the accused. And in the end, their verdict was unanimous, not guilty. The state, they had decided, had failed to meet its burden of proof. There just wasn't enough. No clear connection, no conclusive evidence to say definitively that Howard Lee Halp was involved in Ethan Miller's vanishing. It was vindication for Halp. Heartbreak without closure for Roxanne. And for detectives, another lesson in how tentative justice can be when the truth will not cause. The decision made one thing starkly apparent. Establishing guilt beyond a reasonable doubt in a missing child case is almost impossible without strong forensic evidence. In the mid-1980s, before digital cameras, DNA collections, and instant record checks became the norm, investigators used what they had: notes, photographs, eyewitness accounts, and sometimes that wasn't sufficient. After the jury returned its verdict, Howard Lee Halp was released on bail and the charges against him were dismissed. To law enforcement, the case was closed. But for the Miller family, particularly Roxanne, it was far from over. Roxanne never gave up hope that her son still lived. She never allowed the not guilty verdict to mean the end. Rather, she regarded it as just another chapter, one she would have to continue to turn and she would have to continue to turn in a project or verins case Roger Towns finish as 3 quarter the worst spirits on the continual it's really mechanical. Even after the trial, she remained in contact with detectives, calling regularly to see if anything had turned up or to suggest new leads. She labored tirelessly to keep Ethan's name in the headlines, local television, and missing person announcements. To her, each moment in the spotlight was an opportunity, perhaps the one that would at last return him home. The Halp case was left with lessons for the public and investigators alike. It depicted how thin the line between suspicion and evidence can be. Physical similarity, timing, and general recollection can spin a plausible tale, but without concrete evidence, they can also take you astray. For officers, the case reinforced the need to adhere to protocol, even when the front page and public opinion insisted on swift solutions. For Roxanne, it intensified a more intimate reality. When a case does not get solved, hope must persevere on its own, independent of trials and verdicts. Although Halp was cleared, the case of Ethan Miller remained officially open in the files as Case 841129, Missing Minor. Detectives excluded Halp entirely, but his investigation formed a crucial opening chapter. It challenged the system, showing both the best and the worst of 1980s investigative practice. Over time, life went on, but for Roxanne, things never got back to normal. In 1985, she moved to Oregon, attempting to step out of the media spotlight that had trailed after her through Nevada and California. She found a humble position at a small grocery store, nothing glamorous, but stable. It provided her with routine, something to keep her going as she quietly bore the load of uncertainty. Nevertheless, every night after her shift was over, she returned to her second full-time employment, the search for Ethan. She maintained meticulous notebooks with tips, calls, and letters, cross-referencing dates, names, and locations. No lead proved too tiny to follow. She also kept in regular touch with the law enforcement authorities. She followed up with letters, asked for reports, and kept tracking whatever new information was available. But her longest-standing ritual was one that turned intensely personal. Almost every week, she penned a brief letter to the FBI. Every note was brief, just one line, always the same: "If anyone sees a child named Ethan, please contact me." She sent those letters diligently, reply or no reply. And over time, the ritual became a sacred thing, an unspoken act of courage and devotion. Every letter she wrote and sent was not simply paper and pen, it was a vow to her son and to herself that she would never give up looking. The late 1980s were a difficult period for families trying to find missing loved ones. There was no internet to broadcast messages instantly, no national DNA database to match samples, and no centralized system for tracking runaway children across state lines. All leads had to be pursued the old-fashioned way, by telephone calls, handwritten letters, and personal visits. It was slow, grueling work, and it frequently came to a dead end. For Roxanne Miller's family, that meant a decade of waiting in suspense. There was no body, no solid sightings, and no tangible clues. Ethan's case hung in suspension. Every now and again, someone would spot a boy resembling Ethan in a Utah gas station, an Arizona park, an Idaho rest stop, but each time police investigated, the lead died on them. Every report concluded the same, unable to confirm. Everyone eroded hope, but never to the point of shattering it. Roxanne's experience captured the Pope. Without digital resources or organized systems, she had to create her own network, following up on tips, copying down every letter, every phone number, every potential connection. She was her own investigator, archivist, and advocate, all while maintaining long hours working just to scrape by. Only a handful of friends realized how intensely she was still invested in the search. On the outside, it may have appeared that she had closed the book on the subject, but in private, her nights were consumed by paper trails, maps, and handwritten notes. There were no headlines anymore, no cameras, no police press briefings. Just silence and her determination filling the space it left behind. Each day, she held on to one simple belief. Ethan, Ethan simple belief. Ethan, Ethan, Ethan simple beliefs. Ethan, Ethan, Ethan wife cross. Ethan, itter. Ethan understand roasting is as read. As in Flora, so check this. That's not the yes. Place of view eyes in all Wilbur close. Ethan, Ethan simply something. That thought gave her focus, purpose, and a reason to keep going. Her persistence paid off. In an era when so many cold cases slipped quietly away into the night, Roxanne's nonstop letters, phone calls, and reminders kept her son's name on the active list, in official records, and in people's minds. By 1992, her existence had fallen into steady quietude. She had a place to live, friends, and employment. But the pain of not a, it's not a, and of not a, no, it's the pain of not a, the pain of not a, we're free ends. But the pain of not a pill quiet. A lot of ruin she had a stall, but the M2. The pain of not a is tore. The file case 841129 missing minor may have been tucked away in some police repository, but to Roxanne, it remained open wide. Every unresolved question still resonated through her mind. 14 years went by from that day in 1984 when Ethan Miller, who was 6, disappeared from Whiskey Pete's casino. Then, in 1998, a glimmer of hope showed up, modestly, almost on a whim. A young detective with the Nevada Cold Case Unit had been assigned a routine project, updating old case files from the 1980s and transferring them into the department's new digital database. The goal was simple: preserve history, modernize the records, but sometimes revisiting the past stirs up something unexpected. As the detective sifted through the files, the name of Ethan Miller came to the top. The conditions of his disappearance were uncharacteristic, and the evidence, meager even by 1980 standards, was hauntingly thin. A broken pair of glasses, a few statements, and an unremitting series of letters from a mother. Intrigued, the detective started getting to the bottom of things. He read each report again, studied old composite drawings, and studied pictures from a Utah shelter where a young boy had been put up for adoption, where a young boy had been put up for adoption. He also checked something more recent: school registration records from the mid-1980s to the late 1990s, looking for children who had enrolled in Utah's school system without parental records. It was then that he found a file that stopped him in his tracks. It had belonged to a 20-year-old young man named Noah Thompson, a student at a small college in Utah. Within the file were a few mundane things: his student ID picture, medical information, and some meager background information. Among the details in the Utah file, something halted the detective in his tracks: a teardrop-shaped birthmark located behind Noah Thompson's right ear. It was uncommon, strangely particular, and immediately recognizable. Ethan Miller's initial 1984 medical report had recorded the very same mark in the very same location. The coincidence was too exact to ignore. The detective stepped cautiously. He understood the legal and moral import of what he had discovered. Adoption files were sealed, laws of privacy stringent, particularly if a child had since grown up. Each request, each question had to go through formal channels. He started out with verifying the Utah records, checking whether Noah Thompson had entered the system via a child welfare transfer during the mid-1980s without any biological records. Next, he went back to the Nevada archives to find out whatever evidence had survived from the original Miller investigation. There, sealed and unopened for over a decade, he found what he was looking for, a little envelope with a few strands, Z-strands, Iz's. It wasn't until 1984 that DNA testing hadn't yet been in use. Whoever documented that evidence had done it with enough care that it could now be examined using current technology. The detective made arrangements with the Nevada State Crime Lab workers, obtained DNA from the stored-up hair, amplifying it by polymerase chain reaction, PCR. In the meantime, with informed consent of Noah Thompson, buccal swabs were taken to create a comparative DNA profile. The laboratory worked on the case under blind testing procedures to preclude bias. Double-check results were confirmed by independent analysts to keep the process tight from beginning to end. Weeks went by before the report reached them. All genetic markers matched exactly. Noah Thompson was Ethan Miller. The DNA evidence validated what the birthmark and records already indicated. A boy who went missing from a Nevada casino in 1984 had lived, matured under an assumed name, and established a whole new life several hundred miles away. The word spread to every agency that was engaged. Nevada authorities alerted Utah's child welfare agencies and social services offices. Internal memorandums outlined each step, the DNA match, the physical characteristics, the chain of custody, and the sequence of discovery. Arrangements were made to continue with cautious, lawful reunification procedures, striking a balance between the necessity of truth and delicacy due to an adult who had merely spent his whole life not knowing where he came from. All decisions had to honor adoption secrecy legislation and the psychological burden of the disclosure. In an investigative context, it was unprecedented. A case that had long been unsolved, founded on nothing more than a shattered pair of glasses and a mother's hope, had now been closed by science. But beyond the victory, the discovery disclosed something disquieting. The system had broken down. In 1984, no digital databases existed, no state-to-state cross-checks. Missing children could disappear into new borders, their identity unknown simply because paperwork didn't link. Fax, phone calls, and paper reports were the only connections, and they frequently broke. Ethan's recovery in Utah revealed those gaps in agonizing detail. If there had been an integrated system at the time, a single registry or common digital record, Ethan Miller may have been located years sooner. Instead, it had taken 14 years, one tenacious investigator, and the tools of contemporary forensic analysis to at last bring his name home. Nevertheless, the ultimate identification of Noah Thompson as Ethan Miller finally sewed together the story's largest, most agonizing gap. 14 years of doubt were filled by a single strand, a preserved hair sample, a patient detective, and a few agencies who were willing to collaborate after all those years. It became a template for future investigators, why no detail is too small to hold on to, and why stale cases are worth re-examining when technology catches up. But to get to the point of how Ethan became Noah, we need to return to the very evening that he vanished. It was the night of November 28, 1984. Inside Whiskey Pete's casino, statements were still being taken by investigators, but on Interstate 15 outside, life went on calmly under the stars of Nevada. 30 miles or so northeast of Primm, the casino lights receded into the horizon, lost in desert hills. The highway lay straight and empty through the chill. Truck drivers made their nightly runs, long hauls, constant headlights, and the paddocad of tires on pavement. Just another shift for most. Nothing out of the ordinary. Among them was L. Thompson, a Salt Lake City driver who was pulling a trailer of fabric into Utah. He'd been driving for over a dozen hours and stopped at a tiny gas station just over the line, the sort of isolated, poorly lit stop that lined the highway at the line in the horror it's about to the house to sleep. Racing as part is lot out, Yahores. The air was thin and parched, filled with the acrid scent of diesel and dust. Thompson yawned, stretched his neck, and headed to the rear of his trailer to inspect his load before retiring for the night. That is when he noticed it, or someone. There was a movement behind the piles of cloth. He initially thought it would be a stray animal, a coyote perhaps, or a dog searching for shelter. But then a little face materialized between the piles. A child were childs between the piles. A child were child, a child's first. A child's were child, a child's were church. The boy was Larry, perhaps 6 years old, his hair matted and dusty, his clothes creased and smeared with dirt. He didn't talk, just looked wide-eyed, holding his knees. When Thompson attempted to ask him quietly who he was, the boy remained silent. His lips quivered. His eyes flicked back to the open road. He spoke softly after an embarrassed pause, barely loud enough to be heard. I lost myself in the lights. That one sentence one sentence stit. This wasn't a stray hitchhiker getting a free ride. Something was horribly amiss. He didn't delay. Thompson phoned local law enforcement, describing the figure clearly, age, height, outfit, and condition, as well as the exact spot where he had stopped for gas. Help was on the way, the dispatcher promised him, but in an area as rural as this, response would be delayed. When the officers came, the boy was quiet but awake. Paramedics took his vitals. No trauma, no bruising, just a scared, tired kid who wouldn't release the piece of cloth he'd been hiding behind. He would say his sentence over and over again. I got lost in the lights. It became the one sentence he could utter. The issue, though, was jurisdiction. The kid had been discovered in Utah, but the vanishing, although nobody there was aware yet, had taken place in Nevada, and there was no no centralized network linking reports between states. Utah officials had no means of looking instantly to see if a 6-year-old boy had vanished only hours before in Nevada. They did the best they could. They made a local report which stated an unknown child discovered close to the border and left him in a small children's shelter for temporary placement. For the first time since that crazed night, Ethan, though nobody was familiar with his air, social workers started noting down all this: his height, weight, estimated age, the items of clothing he was wearing, a red jacket, blue jeans, and battered sneakers, and all the tiny identifying features they could spot. They attempted, politely, to question him. Where was he from? Who were his parents? What were their names? But the boy refused to respond. He would just repeat this over and over, as if on a stuck record or a nightmare he could. Hinline speaking out sticks a stuck record or nightmare he could or Yungula sustain cell. Tenement he plowed words. Kiwi police and child welfare officials took his statement to be one of confusion, possibly traumatic amnesia. He recalled bright lights, loud noises, and becoming lost, but nothing else. No identification and no matching reports within their area, Utah authorities had no definitive method for determining who the boy was. They did what they could. Sketches were made. Notes were recorded. A couple of pictures were snapped in case other departments phoned with an inquiry about a missing child. But this was 1984, no computer, no digital records, no easy means to link one small-town shelter in Utah with the police department a handful of miles away in Nevada. And thus, the lighting whispering boy remained nameless, secure, yet unknown, while in Prim, a mother's quest for her missing son had onul vermoedrel had wollig hasentulus, or the Olanabus Ankson had onulofjor. Noah's earliest memories had been piecemeal, glimpses of blinding lights, throngs of people, and the disorientation of being somewhere other than home. He recalled fleeting visions of the casino, the arcade, and the stranger's hands holding his. But time had buried much of the trauma beneath layers of normalcy forged by the life he had grown into with his adoptive family. Roxanne spoke gently, gently provoking his recollections without pressuring. She reminisced about his childhood, games he enjoyed, tunes he sang, bits to stimulate remembrance, not to overload. Noah attended, his gaze searching, nodding at instances that seemed acquainted. Gradually, the bits of his history started to fit the life he had long called his own. Social workers and therapists were called in to facilitate the reunion, guiding mother and son through the emotional burden of learning about each other. Noah had lived with a loving family for 14 years and was now faced with a life he never knew. Professionals urged patience, empathy, and reassurance. The reunion was not only about discovering one another, but about recovering trust and identity. In the weeks that followed, Roxanne and Noah spent hours upon hours together rememorizing each other. Roxanne showed him photographs, family trinkets, and tales of relatives he had never known. No. Noah shared about school, friends, and his life as Noah Thompson. Slowly, the two selves blended. Ethan Miller's memories became part of him, accreted over the life of Noah Thompson, but with all the happiness of reunion came problems. Emotional intensity from having been brought up by a second family, in addition to the trauma of reconnecting with his own birth mother, meant he needed constant counseling. Yet Roxanne's absolute tolerance and the love of adoptive parents made Noah trust enough to open up. He started discussing more freely what happened, what he feared, and those fractured memories of that night spent lost in the desert landscape of Nevada. With measured, purposeful steps, mother and son set about reestablishing a relationship broken for more than a dozen years. What was initially a tale of disappearance and doubt transformed into one of reunion, resilience, and the monumental force of perseverance, both on the part of Roxanne's indefatigable pursuit and that of the investigators who refused to allow the case to slip quietly out of the spotlight. The tale of Ethan Miller, missing then discovered as Noah Thompson, came to symbolize hope for families, police, and advocates. It illustrated that despite the lack of contemporary technology, patience, accurate record-keeping, and sheer will could span decades of separation. Ultimately, Noah's rediscovery finally closed the cold case officially, but it also reopened the tale of a family's love, reminding all concerned that one find, a hair sample preserved, a birthmark, a recalled phrase, could bring back what had been long presumed lost. The tale ends on one of wild. Awaiting 14 years of doubt, terror, and unending searching, Roxanne and Ethan, now completely reclaimed as Noah, were reunited. The youngster who once disappeared into the whirlwind of strobing casino lights and desolate desert highway was secure, bathed in the warmth of a mother's devotion and the solidity of a life at last made whole. Their days passed slowly, with soft routines, memories shared, and trust rebuilt. Every photograph, toy, and anecdote was a bridge between the childhood he'd lost and the man he'd become. The horror of being stashed in a cargo trailer, the disorientation and terror of being separated from home in lights slowly yielded to safety, reassurance, and the knowledge of belonging. Within that tiny Utah room, mother and son's hug was more than a reunion. It was the realization of years of hope, determination, and unbreakable faith that it was possible for a child to be found despite all odds. The lights that were once symbolizing fear and confusion were now a symbol of homecoming and guidance. Love had prevailed, and within its survival, so had the promise of family restored. Noah's tale would persist as a witness that in the midst of less than perfect evidence, corrupt systems, and waiting decades, patience, bravery, and empathy could rewrite what had appeared lost forever.